First thing that comes to mind to me, I guess, is understanding, or the one thing I didn't really grapple with until I got into this, was the magnitude of an impact and the impact it could have on the Canadian sector, right? More of that side, I didn't really realize the magnitude of a disease outbreak and what it could mean for the Canadian sector. And so that's quite alarming. And that's often the approach I take when I talk with producers, is that, this could be ugly, right? Like it could really hurt us. And so it's something that we need to pay attention to and be prepared to deal with this.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Patience, and I have the good fortune of being the host of Swine Canada today. And today we have a very interesting topic and a very, very well qualified person to talk on that topic. It's Todd Bergen-Henengouwe, who works for Siricon and also farms on the side. He's been working for quite some time in the area of foreign animal disease, how to deal with outbreaks, and also how to be prepared for outbreaks. So, Todd, welcome to Swine.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we get started, could I ask you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience, a little bit, your background, and kind of how you got into this whole area of foreign animal disease?
Yeah, you bet. So I grew up in a small town just north of Lethbridge, Alberta, often known as the feedlot capital of Canada. So grew up on a farm in that area. I'm not actually on a livestock farm. Actually grew up on a crop farm where we harvest sugar beets and seed canola and wheat and barley and corn and all kinds of things you can grow under irrigation. So grew up working on the farm, and then went on to university, to the University of Alberta in Edmonton, where I did my Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Business Management. From there, I did get a position with Siricon up in Edmonton, where we work on various types of agriculture-related projects, oftentimes related to economic-type projects, but was lucky enough to be asked to join an animal health emergency management team, where our focus has been on preparing for animal disease outbreaks. And so since 2016, we've been working on this project through different iterations of it. Been working on animal health and animal health related topics. So it's something that's I've grown to love, and it's important to me. I mean, as you had mentioned, I do farm still here in Lethbridge, just north of Lethbridge, and the livelihood of my farm business really does depend on the livestock sector in the area. We have a lot of feedlots that are nearby, and dairies and all types of different types of agriculture in southern Alberta here that my farm business relies on. And so making sure that livestock sector is healthy and prepared for the emergency events that could happen is valuable and important to me. And so that's why it's something that I've really took close interest to and continue to work on. So been doing this work since 2016 through different iterations of the project, and have worked on a number of different areas and a number of different provinces. So it's been really fun and getting to know the people in the sector and hopefully better preparing the sector for different types of emergencies that could strike.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Todd, that being raised in and growing up in that area, as you mentioned, with feedlots and dairies, at least there used to be significant number of hogs there, and some poultry. So you grew up surrounded by livestock in various forms, and so that gives you a great appreciation for the implications of foreign animal disease, and also what can be a practical approach to being prepared for foreign animal disease and for responding to foreign animal disease outbreaks. So seems to me you're well positioned, figuratively and literally, to be an authority on this subject. So we're glad to have you today. Now, Todd, before we start, can you share with our audience a bit of the structure of the preparedness activities that are going on in Canada, sort of how it's handled at the federal level, how it's handled at the provincial level, and then is there an even narrower, more local level of preparedness that's going on, just to help us to understand that infrastructure that's in place?
Yeah, of course. So Yeah, a lot of different levels you can look at it. So, I mean, whether we're talking about federally reportable diseases or provincially reportable diseases, or even talking about other types of emergencies such as fires and floods and how that can impact different levels in different municipalities. So there definitely are those different levels. So if we start at the national level, CFIA is the key regulatory body that would look after a federally reportable disease. So something like foot and mouth disease or African swine fever would be regulated and controlled by CFIA. So they really have, their preparedness and their response efforts are focused at that national level and focusing on those large scale, trade impacting diseases. You go down to the provincial level, each province would have their own provincially notifiable or reportable diseases that they'd be responsible for, being that governing body or that regulatory body. So when we talk about PED, that's one of the ones that often falls underneath the provincial jurisdiction, and they're responsible for looking after the response efforts with regards to those provincial diseases. And then once you move down to the municipal level, those much more are focused on non-disease related type events, the fires, the floods, the power outages and those type of things. That's where often that level of jurisdiction will take the key role in responding to those events. Not saying that, municipal or provincial won't be involved in national efforts. It's just that they won't be the kind of the head body that will be heading on the response efforts. So there are those different efforts that are going on. And I guess as it all fits into, why I'm here and how our project fits in, our project is a nationally funded project, the Animal Health Emergency Management Project, which focuses on better preparing the Canadian livestock sector for animal disease outbreaks. And so we've worked with provinces, we've worked with municipalities, we've worked with national level organizations as well in better preparing their sectors for those types of emergencies. And the Animal Health Emergency Management Project, if we go one level higher, is part of a broader effort called, or under an organization called Animal Health Canada. So it's something that's been recently formed with the goal of bringing industry and government together to better prepare sectors for animal health and welfare related items. So it's a pretty broad group, and our project specific to emergency management and disease outbreaks really fits under that Animal Health Canada banner. And so we've been working with them and under that umbrella organization, and I think it'll really be beneficial to the Canadian livestock sector just to try and coordinate these efforts going forward across Canada, and not just looking at it from a province to province perspective.
Yeah. And my last question in this respect, Todd, could you share with our listeners who's involved in the planning process? There will be people like yourself that are, I guess you could say, employed in the initiative and in the various projects. But I'm sure there's committees or there's oversight of what's going on at the provincial level or the federal level. And who is represented? What portions of the livestock industry, government, etc., are represented in those federal and provincial organizations?
Yeah, so I would look to a number of the working groups. I mean, the African Swine Fever Executive Management Board has been something that's been established in the Canadian context, and essentially what that's done is pull together various swine-related groups across Canada, so whether it be industry or government-related, and has brought all those people together and has formed a number of working groups that have focused their efforts on specific components of disease response. So, there's ones that focus on hog supply, there's ones that focus on, biosecurity. There's a number of different working groups that have been put together to better prepare themselves for African swine fever. And so that's really pulled people from provincial livestock organizations, industry groups, veterinarians across the country, and has pulled them together to, again, try to coordinate these efforts to better prepare ourselves to respond for something like African swine fever. So it's been a really interesting model to see how it's been put together and how it could potentially work for other types of diseases or emergencies as well.
Great. And actually, I have a final question on the structure. Sorry. and that is because I want to move on to the main guts of what we're going to talk about today. But I think our audience would be interested. What kind of interaction do the Canadian components of this foreign animal disease preparedness interact with obviously the U.S., which is our closest neighbor, but also globally? What kind of sharing or interaction or coordination is going on beyond the national level?
Yeah, so that's another wrinkle in all of it, is looking at it from an international context. And there's been various efforts that have been ongoing related to international, but I know with my own experience, our CFIA government representatives have been in contact with the USDA and the APHIS down there, and trying to, I guess, align those efforts and making sure that we have an understanding of, if something were to happen on this side of the border, what the impacts would be on the other side, and trying to understand how that communication flow would work in time of a crisis. So I know that those conversations have been ongoing in the background, but outside of that, even in the public eye, there have been meetings that have been put together. Specifically, one I'm remembering through the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to get the acronym wrong here, but it's the PNWAR, Pacific Northwest Economic. It's a group that has come together, and it's actually they've actually sat down and had discussions with a broader audience about how a disease outbreak would unfold and what that would look like on either side of the border, and what that communication would be, and just try to get an understanding of what actions would be taken on either side of the border, so that each country can recognize what the status of an outbreak might be and what it might look like, so that they can be prepared for those type of situations for in the event that they may happen. So those conversations do happen. There's been various interactions where they've been, publicly available to see how that would happen, but there's a lot going on in the background as well.
Gotcha. Very good. Excellent. And that's really important as well. And so many people who are involved in livestock agriculture will unfortunately have probably at least remnants of memories of the BSE situation that occurred and the implication that has on trade, et cetera, et cetera. So let's move in and talk about the work that you're doing, what's being done provincially and federally as it relates to foreign animal disease preparedness.
Sure. So the Animal Health Emergency Management Project, or AHEM is the acronym that we've been using. It's really focused on enhancing the livestock sector and being better prepared to respond to serious animal disease outbreaks. That's really been our goal, and trying to build capacity for responding to those, building knowledge of disease outbreaks. And so it's there's a lot of different prongs that we've used to try and better prepare the sector. And there's 6 key activity areas that we've worked in. So one of them has been protocol development. So the development of protocols that would be implemented in case of a disease outbreak. The second activity is actually resource development, and that's something that I've been the activity lead for that project, and something I've been spending a lot of time on. And so developing resources for producers, developing resources for provincial associations, staff, and national level staff as well, to actually respond to disease outbreaks. So it's really providing some education to producers and staff members on how a disease outbreak would be managed, how they can prepare, and then how they would actually be asked to respond in the case of a disease outbreak. So the resources and having that information there is really important. And there's been a number of other 1 or 2 pagers that have been developed as well. So that's really been the second activity area, and there's a lot of work that's been done there. All the resources that we've developed are available on our website at animalhealth.ca for anybody that's interested in seeing the work that we've done. So that's all available online electronically. The third activity area is really focused on building awareness around the resources and the information that's available. So trying to get that information actually out to producers and out to industry stakeholders. So that's been the key focus there. And obviously it's been hard during the pandemic getting that information out, but over the last 2 years, we've covered a lot of ground in getting this information out to producers. I know, you talk about biosecurity or anything for that matter. Producers, it's important, but I think it's something that you really do have to keep reiterating and keep getting information out there on, just for it to actually build that understanding and build that education. It takes an iterative effort to do that. So we've continued to do work in the awareness area. The fourth activity area is actually on training, and that's taken on a few different angles. One has been on incident command training. So the incident command system is what's used here in Canada for actually managing disease outbreaks or emergencies for that matter. And so doing some training for industry staff and producers on ICS and incident command and understanding how that process works has been part of that training activity. We've also done some disease recognition training for veterinarians and industry staff members on what are the key signs and symptoms of foot and mouth disease or African swine fever. And we're currently running a course for avian influenza right now, with that being obviously one of the key diseases we're dealing with in the Canadian livestock sector, or well, North American for that matter. So doing some early identification or early disease detection has been the main effort there. And those have been really popular, those courses. So we've been quite happy with how that's turned out. And then the fifth activity area that we've worked on, and I mentioned this previously, was the African Swine Fever Executive Management Board. So we've been helping facilitate some of those conversations and taking care of the administrative work on that. And then the last activity area that our project is focused on has been on foot and mouth disease and response strategies to foot and mouth disease as it relates to vaccination. So looking at how a vaccination may actually roll out in the case that was the approach taken in case of a foot and mouth disease outbreak. And so that's been one of the areas we've been doing some work on and developing some protocols for that. So pretty broad project that we've covered a lot of angles on, and it's been really well received. And we're working on, developing our next iteration of this project, what that might look like in the coming months here.
It's pretty complex topic, isn't it? It requires an awful lot of effort on the part of an awful lot of people working in different sectors of livestock agriculture. So appreciate what you're doing. And I'd now like to delve into preparedness. We will get to response before we end the podcast, Todd, okay? But I would like to talk a bit more about preparedness. And I'm going to ask a question. I don't know if it falls into your area of knowledge or not, but the one thing that I'm aware of, just as a John Q citizen, crossing a border, and I cross the land border quite frequently because I live both in Canada and the United States, so I go back and forth a lot. And I have traveled internationally and flown back into Canada, so arriving at airports as well as land borders. And I guess I'm a bit surprised that at least at my level of consciousness, I don't see a whole lot of what seems to me attention being paid to foreign animal disease. I don't get asked the question very much. I get asked the question, are you bringing anything back? And that, of course, could lead there. And I know that the border agents have so many things they're looking for. They can't have a conversation with every person passing through the border. But I've been a bit surprised that given the economic implications of foreign animal disease break in Canada, and the fact that, for example, African swine fever is not right around us, but it's not too far away. What's going on at the border to try to prevent that vehicle for entry into Canada? Because there could be all kinds of things going on behind the scene that I don't see. There could be dogs in the baggage area and so on that I just don't see. So
no. So I mean, I'm not as fluent on all the efforts that are being taken there, but I do know I'm familiar with a few. So there has been a request and response from the Canadian Border Services Agency to enhance their security to detect different meat products and different things for being brought into Canada. And so I won't put out numbers because I don't know exactly, but they have added more sniffing dogs to their arsenal. And so there are those dogs that are in some of the major airports and are checking baggage and luggage every once in a while, and they do seize items somewhat regularly. And so So they're doing their job, and I mean it's impossible to catch everything. I mean, you think about how much traffic goes in and out of Canada, whether it be through land borders or through air, and so it is pretty difficult to stop all movements. But that's one effort that's been made to do a better job of catching meat products that are trying to be brought into Canada. The other one is I know CFIA has done a lot of work in developing communication efforts and providing banners and graphics and different things regarding the danger that importing or bringing in pork products or meat products for that matter into Canada could have. And so I think that's a really important piece because, like I say, the dogs, it's quite targeted efforts. It's not a broad-based effort to attach it, but if you have the education effort, getting information out there to people that are entering or leaving Canada about the risk that bringing in meat products could have to the Canadian livestock sector, I think that's a really good approach to take. And so trying to educate travelers on what you can and can't bring in and the risk that it could pose, I think is really important effort that's been taken by CFIA. And so there's been a number of things that have been offered through CFIA to better inform travelers about the risk it could pose.
Okay, very good. Good. I appreciate that. I guess it's a pet topic of mine, I guess, because I cross the border so much. And when we approach the border and we have food items in the car, we're either trying to find a place to dump them or we're madly eating them before we get up to the border agent. So that's kind of a personal thing, but I take it very seriously because I think it's a very serious topic. With just staying on preparedness for a minute before we move to response, since you've been working in this area so much, are there one or two topics or aspect of foreign animal disease preparedness that you would say, my goodness, if I was not involved at the level that I am, I would never have dreamed that this was important, or I had no idea that this would have to be a part of foreign animal disease preparedness? I'm wanting to take advantage of your experience, Todd, and if there's one or two items that come to mind that you say, wow, most people would never think that this is an important part of foreign animal disease preparedness.
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind to me, I guess, is understanding, or the one thing I didn't really grapple with until I got into this, was the magnitude of an impact and the impact it could have on the Canadian sector, right? More of that side, I didn't really realize the magnitude of a disease outbreak and what it could mean for the Canadian sector. And so that's quite alarming. And that's often the approach I take when I talk with producers, is that, this could be ugly, right? Yeah. Like it could really hurt us. And so it's something that we need to pay attention to and be prepared to deal with this. I often use the poultry sector as an example. I mean, they've dealt with high path avian influenza in 2004 in BC and in 2014. And, it really affected them significantly. And so using them as an example, I often draw a comparison between 2004 and 2014 and the magnitude of the impact. And between those 2 years, between those two outbreaks, the BC sector did a lot of work in being better prepared. And it really showed in the magnitude and the outcome of those disease outbreaks. The number of animals that were diseased and had to be euthanized was significantly less. The number of infected premises was way less. And so that was really interesting to learn that, the value of preparedness and response really can have an impact on a disease outbreak. So that's one of the things, I guess, that maybe I didn't realize coming in. I didn't realize the magnitude of something like that. And I think about my own context here with the number of feedlots that are in the area and the number of animals. It's there's a lot of cattle in this area in a very small geographic area. A lot of swine in this area as well. And so having a disease come through here could really wreak havoc on the operations and supply chain of our sector. So something I've definitely given a little bit more thought to. And there's more problems there than you think when you start to dive in.
Right. Yeah. It's a big issue. So let's turn now to to response to foreign animal disease. And could you share with us and I don't structure it any way you want, Todd, whether it's chronological or priority or however that at the farm level or at the provincial level or federal, however you want to structure the answer to this. But can you describe the plan that Canada has in place or the provinces have in place to deal with a foreign animal disease outbreak in Canada? We hope this never is required, of course. We hope the work that's being done to minimize the risk is working well, and so we don't have to respond. But if we do have to respond, what's it going to look like?
Yeah, and it really will depend on the type of disease and the nature of the disease. So, I mean, obviously the answer is depends, but I can try to fill in some of those gaps as best as I can. For something like African swine fever or foot and mouth disease, the approach, and this is the approach that's taken in a lot of countries, and for several highly contagious diseases, would be the actual eradication of the disease or the virus. And so in order to do that, there's several key control strategies that would be implemented by CFIA and or provincial governments and industry. Everybody be partnered in on this and trying to make efforts to try and eliminate that virus or whatever contagious disease it might be. And so those control efforts really focus on containing the spread, trying to prevent further spread of that disease. So when it comes to that involves efforts such as zoning or quarantines. So if your farm is the one that's suspected to be infected with the disease, your farm would be quarantined. So there'd be no livestock or animal products moved on or off of that farm for that period of time. Perhaps there could be an exemption of getting feed onto a farm in case there is some welfare concerns. So that perhaps could be one exemption. Other control efforts would be actually zoning around that infected premises. So trying to essentially create a buffer zone around those infected premises, trying to prevent that disease from exiting a certain specific area. And so zoning can have indirect consequences as well. There's other farms that could be caught within that zone that aren't infected and don't have the disease that, would then be impacted as a result. And so, there'd be limits on movements that would be allowed between certain areas. If you could move livestock into or out of that zone could be a question. So there's the number of things there that would need to be considered and could affect farms within that zone. So yeah, I mean, the control strategy is one of the big things. The next thing is actually, eradicating that virus or that disease. And so that would entail actually stamping out of livestock and the carriers of that disease. So infected farms, in the case of foot and mouth disease or African swine fever, those infected animals would be euthanized. They'd need to be euthanized. And then disposed of properly in a way that virus does not stay alive in the environment. So there's the destruction and disposal efforts that would be required on infected premises or premises that were suspected of being infected. So that's quite an undertaking to take on that eradication effort. And then the last thing that would need to be done is cleaning and disinfection of those premises that were suspected to be infected. So you'd have a barn that would be empty because those animals had been euthanized. The actual barn would need to be cleaned and disinfected. So that might involve removing all the manure, making sure that it's washed down good, making sure it's free of any organic matter, debris, and then actually using some type of a cleaning agent or disinfectant to actually kill any virus that may exist on those buildings or those structures. And so again, that's quite a significant process to undertake. And would be required in order for animals to be allowed back into that barn or that shed or that area before, so that they wouldn't become infected again. So these are efforts that need to be taken by CFIA in the Canadian context before animals can be reintroduced. And it's important because especially when it's a federally reportable disease, such as like foot and mouth disease or African swine fever, in order to get back into that international market, all of those steps need to be taken in order to make sure that we're free of the disease and then allowed to export livestock again. So it's an important process that needs to be followed quite closely in order for a country to regain that market-free access. So there's those three kind of key stages there. It's controlling the disease, eradicating the virus, and then cleaning and disinfecting are the kind of three key steps to getting rid of the virus or the disease.
Right. So getting a little more specific then, since our audience is swine focused, if I'm a farm and I have the disease has broken on my farm or suspected to be on my farm, and so the animals have to be euthanized, I have to clean and disinfect, and make sure that the barns are clear of the virus. How long a period of time will transpire from when we'll call it the diagnosis occurs and when I can start putting pigs back in that barn?
Yeah, that's a tough answer, a tough question. Really, it comes down to what resources are available to actually carry out that process. So the actual depopulation and disposal effort is a massive effort. And I know that there was some work done here in Canada on what it would take to depopulate certain sizes of sow barns or finishing barns or feedlots for that matter as well. And it's multiple weeks to euthanize large barns. So that's one component of it, is how long does it take to actually get rid of those animals, and that largely depends on how many people and how many resources are available to actually do that. So that's a major factor when deciding or determining how long that process would take. The cleaning and disinfection, again, would be a pretty significant process depending on size and nature of your barn and the different things that are all in there. You talk about fences or slotted flooring and where manure is stored, making sure that that's all cleaned out. So I mean, that's quite a large process, and again, depends on the resources that you have on your farm or available to you to do that. And then the next thing is, how long of an incubation period do you need to have in order to prove that you're actually free of that virus? So, there needs to be ongoing testing and surveillance of your premises or your farm after the cleaning and disinfection process is taken on, and then putting new livestock in there and actually surveying those livestock as well, ensuring that they're not exhibiting any signs or symptoms. So it can be quite significant. I'm not sure I can put a time on it, but it's quite a large undertaking to get from start to finish. So there's some preparation efforts that can be done there to try and facilitate that process as best as possible, because that's really what we want to do. I mean, in that unfortunate case that we actually do have a disease incursion, the next step, the next focus is, okay, let's get through this as fast as we can and try to get out on the other side and get back to the market, right? So there's things that we can do to try and speed up that process, that eradication effort. There's definitely some things we can do to be better prepared to do that process.
Right. Very good. Maybe my final question on response side, Todd, before we wrap things up is there a process of zoning in Canada? So for example, if there was a break in Eastern Canada, Central Canada, that Western Canada could still export animals, is that in place, or is that being worked on? And is that, or has that been accepted by foreign governments?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something that comes up a lot of times in our discussions. I mean, Canada and the US are massive countries. I mean, it makes up, a good portion of Europe if you're trying to overlap it. I mean, you see in Germany, for example, you've got ASF, and, Germany's whatever, probably the size of smaller than a number of provinces, right? And so, trying to gain some understanding around, can we try and zone off certain portions of the country versus others, is definitely something that's been looked into. Whether or not it's being accepted by the international community, I'm not quite sure what the status of that is currently. I know that there are efforts, specifically with foot and mouth disease. There's a CFIA, one of the doctors there I'd been working with, Dr. Tom Smiley, he'd been working at the international level trying to gain acceptance of ring vaccination as a way of trying to zone or cordon off certain parts of the country or even a geographic area, and then trying to allow the rest of the country to regain trade. But my understanding is right now, so there's been efforts that have been made to look into, if that can be done. I don't think it's being recognized currently, but those efforts are ongoing. There's also been work with compartmentalization. I'm not sure for those out there that may be familiar with that term, but essentially establishing compartments within your sector, proving that, the livestock that are within that compartment would be free of a disease simply based on the fact that it's kind of a closed system. So there's been some work on getting countries to recognize compartments as being free from a disease, so that in the case that a disease were to break in Canada or any part of North America, that these compartments could remain accessible to the international market because they can prove that they have heightened biosecurity and proof that, that the disease doesn't exist within their compartment. So there's been some work that's been done by the Canadian Pork Council on trying to get countries to recognize that. I don't know the current status of where that is, but there's definitely been efforts there. So by and large, there's a lot of work that's being done to try and, isolate the diseased areas and try to regain access. But I think right now, at least if there were to be a disease break in Canada or the US, the likely response would be an automatic border closure, and then perhaps some relaxing of border closures later on as you can prove that certain areas are free of the disease. So I think that would be, the what we anticipate to be the thing that would happen. And then hopefully, over time there could be some relaxing of those requirements, border requirements, preventing trade.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Todd. This has been really interesting. Obviously a very, very important topic to Canadian livestock sector, producers and others associated with the industry. Maybe in our we got a couple minutes left, Todd, if you have any kind of take-home messages you'd like to leave with our listeners, important points that you would like them to be kind of keeping in the back of their mind or thinking about when they're pondering this whole issue of foreign animal disease as it relates to them.
Yeah. So the three take-home messages that I often try to get across to producers and service providers and people within the industry, there's three key things that, us as being part of the industry can do and be prepared for. And I think it's important to highlight those. And so the first one is early disease recognition. So knowing what the signs and symptoms are of serious animal diseases. So whether it be foot and mouth disease, African swine fever, even, PED. If you can detect a disease early on, you can take steps immediately to try to limit the spread of the disease. So that's a huge thing is making sure that staff and farmers and service providers are aware of what those signs and symptoms are. The next thing that I try to communicate to folks is the importance of biosecurity and preventing the disease from entering your farm. So, there's your routine day-to-day biosecurity that you use on your farm, and service providers would have the same thing. And that's a really important first effort in preventing a disease from coming onto a farm or leaving somewhere else, regardless of whether it's a federally reportable disease or not. Biosecurity is critical in breaking that chain of disease transmission. So that's a huge component, but also being conscious of what your enhanced biosecurity measures could look like. So if we do notice that there's something strange going on within the sector, perhaps there's some ways we can ratchet up our biosecurity on our farms and through service providers to make sure that we're not the ones that are transmitting that disease. So there's definitely your standard biosecurity and then your next level enhanced biosecurity that could be considered. The last thing that I try to tell folks is that, there's things that we can do to take action. When, government or, CFIA or USDA tells us or makes a recommendation that we should be doing something on our farm, we should take that to heart and actually take action on our farms to prevent spread. There's a number of things we can do to prepare in advance as part of that taking action. So setting up site plans, having some type of a plan on your farm that outlines, where structures are located. It could be just a map view of your farm, an aerial view, Knowing where barns are located and having that there is an important piece of an emergency plan, not just for disease outbreaks, but also for floods or fires. Those are valuable things. Having a contacts list of all the people that work on the farm, also those that own the farm or the primary decision makers. So having that there, keeping good visitor logs of who's been on your farm and who's been off of it, what products have come and gone. That's another important thing that we can do to be prepared. So those are a few key things that I just highlight to folks when I speak to them. These are things that we can do to prepare in advance. And if we have those documents and those resources set up in advance, it can help facilitate that response effort much faster. It can give the regulators and the veterinarians the information that they need much sooner so that they can make decisions. So those are kind of the three key takeaways that I try and promote to producers and service providers. It's early detection of the disease, it's biosecurity, and it's taking action in the moment and in advance of a disease outbreak.
Great. We've been speaking to Todd Bergen-Henengouwen from Southern Alberta, who has been working extensively for about the last 6 or 7 years on foreign animal disease preparedness. Todd, we really appreciate the time you've taken with us today, and thank you so much for all the information that you shared. So I'm John Patience from Swine Canada. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in future podcasts. Thank you very much.